Drake leaned back on the couch, balancing his laptop on his knees as his wife, Emily, walked into the living room holding her brand new phone. The box was still open, the shiny device untouched, and she looked at him with that familiar mix of exasperation and charm. "Drake, can you help me set this up?" she asked, holding the phone out. "You know I'm useless with these things." Drake chuckled, setting his laptop aside. "Sure, hand it over. Let's see what we've got." Emily sat beside him, her shoulder brushing against his as she watched him work. Drake had always been the tech-savvy one in their relationship, and Emily often teased him about being her personal IT guy. As he powered on the phone, transferred her contacts, and began downloading her favorite apps, he felt a small pang of pride at how seamlessly he could make her life easier. "What would I do without you?" Emily said with a grin, resting her chin on his shoulder. "Probably still be using that ancient flip phone," Drake teased, making her laugh. As Drake continued setting up the phone, Emily got up to grab a glass of water. "Just make sure all my old photos transfer, okay?" she called from the kitchen. "I don't want to lose anything." "You got it," Drake replied. He connected the phone to her cloud backup and began syncing her data. It was a slow process, so he scrolled through her old files to ensure everything was transferring correctly. That's when he noticed something odd. Among the usual photos of family outings, selfies, and pictures of their dog, there was a folder labeled "Private" tucked away in her gallery. Drake hesitated. He'd never been the type to snoop, but curiosity tugged at him. Why would Emily have a folder marked "Private" that she'd never mentioned before? Probably nothing, he muttered to himself. But the thought lingered. A few minutes later, Emily returned, sipping her water. "How's it going?" "Almost done," Drake said, his tone casual. "Just making sure everything's backed up." Emily sat down beside him, glancing at the screen. "Thanks, babe. You're the best." Drake smiled, though the question of the folder lingered in the back of his mind. Should he ask her about it? Or would that make him look like he didn't trust her? Later that evening, after Emily had gone to bed, Drake found himself unable to sleep. The folder kept gnawing at his thoughts, and before he knew it, he was back on the couch, holding her new phone. It wasn't locked yet, he hadn't finished setting up her passwords, and the temptation was too strong to resist. He opened the gallery and clicked on the "Private" folder. What he saw made his blood run cold. The folder contained a series of screenshots from text messages Emily had exchanged with someone whose name was saved as Nate, work. The conversation started innocently enough, discussing a project Emily had mentioned working on. But as Drake scrolled further, the tone shifted. "Nate, you looked amazing today. Couldn't stop staring. Emily, you're such a flirt. Be careful, or someone might overhear you. Nate, let them. I don't care who knows how much I like you." Drake's stomach churned. He scrolled faster, his hands shaking. "Nate, I can't stop thinking about last night." "Emily, me neither." It felt right. The screenshots ended there, but the implication was clear. Something had happened between Emily and Nate, something she hadn't told him about. Drake put the phone down, his mind racing. Emily had never mentioned a Nate before. Sure, she'd talked about coworkers and the occasional office drama, but there was no reason for this name to stand out, until now. He tried to calm himself, searching for logical explanations. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe she'd been venting to a friend or playing along with some harmless banter. But deep down, he knew better. The messages were too intimate, too deliberate to be innocent. The next morning, Drake couldn't hide his unease. Emily was cheerful, humming to herself as she made coffee, completely unaware of the storm brewing in his mind. He studied her, searching for signs of guilt, but she looked as calm and collected as ever. "You okay?" she asked, noticing his distant expression. "You've been quiet." "Yeah," Drake said quickly. "Just tired." Emily nodded, accepting his response without pressing further. But as she left for work, kissing him lightly on the cheek, Drake felt his resolve harden. He needed answers, and he wasn't going to wait for them to fall into his lap. That day, while Emily was at work, Drake began digging deeper. He checked her old phone, scrolling through her messages and emails, but there was nothing from Nate. It was as if she'd wiped every trace of him from her digital life, except for those screenshots. Why would she save them? Drake muttered to himself. And why hide them if there's nothing to hide? The questions kept piling up, and with each one, Drake's suspicions grew. When Emily returned home that evening, Drake decided to test the waters. "How was work?" he asked casually as they sat down for dinner. "Good," Emily said with a smile. "Same old stuff. Anything interesting happen? New projects? New coworkers?" Emily frowned slightly, then shook her head. "Not really. Just the usual." Drake felt a surge of anger at her nonchalance. If she was hiding something, she was doing an excellent job of pretending everything was fine. "Do you know a Nate?" Drake asked suddenly, watching her closely. Emily froze, her fork hovering midair. "Nate," she repeated, her voice carefully neutral. "Yeah, he's one of the guys on the marketing team." "Why?" Drake leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Just curious. You've never mentioned him before." Emily shrugged, her smile returning. "He's not really someone I work with directly." "Why do you ask?" "No reason," Drake said, though his suspicions burned hotter than ever. That night, after Emily had fallen asleep, Drake made a decision. He needed the full story, and he wasn't going to wait for Emily to volunteer it. Whether it meant confronting her directly or uncovering the truth on his own, he was determined to get to the bottom of whatever she was hiding. The next morning, Drake awoke with a sense of grim determination. Emily was already up, bustling around the kitchen as she packed her lunch for work. She hummed softly to herself, her cheerful demeanor contrasting sharply with the turmoil in Drake's mind. "Morning," she said brightly as he walked in. "Coffee's ready." "Thanks," Drake replied, forcing a smile. He poured himself a cup and leaned against the counter, watching her closely. Her every move seemed calculated, her every smile carefully crafted to mask whatever secret she was hiding. Or maybe, Drake thought bitterly, she wasn't hiding anything at all, maybe she was just that good at pretending. "Busy day ahead?" he asked casually. "Probably," Emily said with a shrug. "Same meetings, different day." Drake's jaw tightened. She was lying, he could feel it. But instead of confronting her, he decided to bide his time. Once Emily left for work, Drake returned to her phone. Though he had found the incriminating screenshots, he needed more. He needed context, evidence, something concrete to confront her with. He searched her cloud backups, scouring the saved files for anything that might reveal the truth. Most of it was mundane, work documents, old photos, and archived emails. But in her recent backups, he found a folder labeled temp_notes. Drake clicked it, his hands trembling. Inside were several saved text files. One stood out immediately, titled simply Thoughts. He opened the file, his heart pounding. "I feel like I'm living two lives. Drake is amazing, kind, loyal, supportive, but sometimes I wonder if I'm settling. Nate makes me feel alive, like the me I used to be before the responsibilities of marriage. I know it's wrong, but I can't stop thinking about him. I don't know what to do. I feel like I'm standing at a crossroads, and no matter which way I turn, someone gets hurt." Drake stared at the words, his chest tightening. The confirmation of her emotional affair hit him like a punch to the gut. She wasn't just flirting with Nate, she was questioning their entire marriage. By the time Emily returned home that evening, Drake's anger had simmered into cold resolve. He couldn't pretend everything was fine anymore. He needed answers, and he needed them now. Hey, Emily said as she walked through the door, setting her bag down on the counter. How was your day? Interesting, Drake said, his tone clipped. He watched as her smile faltered slightly. Oh, she said, her voice cautious. Why's that? Drake folded his arms. Because I've been doing some thinking. And some digging. Emily froze, her expression shifting from confusion to unease. What are you talking about? I'm talking about Nate, Drake said, his voice low. And the screenshots you saved. And the file I found in your backups. Thoughts, you called it. Care to explain? Emily's face drained of color. Drake, Don't lie to me, he interrupted, his voice rising. I've seen enough to know you're hiding something. I want the truth, Emily. All of it. She sank into a chair, her hands trembling. I never meant for it to get this far, she said quietly. It started as nothing, just casual conversations at work. But then what? Drake demanded, his fists clenched. You started fantasizing about leaving me for him? No. Emily said quickly, her eyes filling with tears. It was never about leaving you, Drake. I felt lost. Like I wasn't myself anymore. And Nate made me feel seen. Seen? Drake said bitterly. That's what you call betraying me? It wasn't a betrayal, Emily said, her voice cracking. I never slept with him. I never even kissed him. But you wanted to, Drake said. Don't lie. Emily hesitated, then looked away. I don't know what I wanted. Drake let out a bitter laugh, his anger boiling over. Well, I know what I want. I want to know why you lied to me. Why you pretended everything was fine while you were hiding this other life. I didn't know how to tell you, Emily said, tears streaming down her face. You've always been so good, Drake. So steady. I didn't want to hurt you. Well, congratulations, Drake said coldly. You managed to do it anyway. The argument stretched late into the night, neither of them willing to back down. Emily insisted that her connection with Nate had been purely emotional, a fleeting distraction from her struggles. But to Drake, her excuses felt hollow. You don't save screenshots of someone who's just a distraction, Drake said. You don't write about how they make you feel alive unless it's something more. I know, Emily whispered, her voice heavy with regret. I was wrong. I see that now. But it's over, Drake. I ended it weeks ago. Did you? Drake asked. Or did you just get better at hiding it? Emily's silence was answer enough. The next morning, Drake called in sick to work. He couldn't face the world while his marriage was unraveling. Instead, he spent the day pacing the house, replaying their argument in his mind. Part of him wanted to forgive her, to believe her when she said it was over. But another part couldn't shake the doubt gnawing at him. Later that afternoon, Emily sent him a text. Can we talk tonight? I know I've hurt you, but I want to fix this. Drake stared at the message, his emotions a tangled mess of anger, sadness, and longing. He didn't know if their marriage could survive this, but he wasn't ready to give up just yet. That evening, as Emily walked through the door, Drake braced himself for another confrontation. But instead of arguing, they sat down at the kitchen table, their silence heavy with unspoken words. I don't know if I can trust you, Drake said finally, his voice quiet but firm. But I'm willing to try, if you're honest with me. No more lies, Emily. Not one. Emily nodded, her tears falling freely. I'll do whatever it takes, Drake. I swear. Drake's heart ached as he looked at her. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe they could rebuild what they'd lost. But deep down, he knew their journey was far from over. The silence between Drake and Emily grew heavier in the days that followed. Despite her promises to be honest, Drake found himself questioning everything she said, dissecting every word and gesture for signs of deception. Emily, for her part, seemed genuinely remorseful, but her efforts to make amends felt hollow against the weight of what she'd done. One evening, after a tense dinner, Emily hesitated as she cleared the table. "I think we should go to counseling," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Drake looked up from his plate, his expression guarded. "You think that's going to fix this?" "I don't know," Emily admitted, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But I want to try. I don't want to lose us, Drake." Drake studied her for a moment, his emotions warring within him. Finally, he nodded. "All right. We'll try. But it's going to take more than a few therapy sessions to fix this." Emily's relief was palpable. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "I promise I'll do whatever it takes." Their first counseling session was uncomfortable, to say the least. The therapist, a calm and composed woman named Dr. Merrill, asked them to share their perspectives on the situation without interrupting each other. "I thought we were happy," Drake said, his voice laced with bitterness. "I thought we had a good life. But while I was busy working to provide for us, Emily was looking for validation from someone else." Emily winced but didn't interrupt. Dr. Merrill turned to her. "Emily, what do you want to say to that?" Emily took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Drake's right. I betrayed his trust. But I wasn't looking for validation, I was looking for, I don't know, a way to feel like myself again. I got caught up in something I didn't understand until it was too late." Drake shook his head. "You knew what you were doing, Emily. You knew it would hurt me." "I did," Emily said, her voice breaking. "And I hate myself for it." Dr. Merrill guided them through a series of exercises designed to foster communication, but the underlying tension between them remained. After the session, as they walked to the car, Drake turned to Emily. "You said it was over with Nate," he said. "But I need to know for sure. Is there anything else I don't know?" Emily hesitated, and in that moment, Drake's stomach sank. "What is it?" he demanded. "It's nothing," she said quickly. I deleted everything because I didn't want you to find it." Drake's anger flared. "You think deleting evidence makes it better?" "It makes it worse, Emily. It makes me think you have even more to hide." "I don't," Emily insisted, her voice rising. "Drake, please, you have to believe me." But he didn't. He couldn't. The next day, while Emily was at work, Drake decided to dig deeper. If she wasn't going to tell him the full truth, he would find it himself. He accessed their shared cell phone plan, pulling up her call and text logs. One number stood out immediately, Nate's. Though Emily had claimed to cut ties with him, the logs told a different story. She had exchanged texts with him as recently as 2 weeks ago, long after she had supposedly ended things. Drake felt a wave of fury and betrayal wash over him. She had lied to him again, even after everything they'd been through. When Emily returned home that evening, Drake was waiting for her in the living room. Her face fell when she saw his expression. "What's wrong?" she asked cautiously. "I checked the phone records," Drake said, his voice cold. "You've been texting Nate. Recently." Emily's eyes widened, and she shook her head. "Drake, it's not what you think." "Don't," he snapped, cutting her off. "Don't lie to me again, Emily. I've had enough." Tears filled her eyes. "I'm not lying. He texted me a few weeks ago, and I told him to stop. I swear, Drake. That's all it was. You expect me to believe that?" Drake said, his anger boiling over. "After everything you've hidden from me, you think I'm just going to take your word for it?" Emily broke down, her sobs racking her body. "I don't know how to fix this," she cried. "I don't know what else I can do to prove to you that I'm done with him." Drake stared at her, his emotions a tangled mess of rage, hurt, and a faint glimmer of hope. "If you want to fix this," he said finally, "then you're going to have to be an open book. No more secrets. No more lies." "I will," Emily whispered. "I'll do whatever it takes." The following weeks were filled with more counseling sessions and tense conversations. Emily gave Drake access to her phone, her emails, and even her social media accounts. She deleted Nate's number in front of him, vowing that she would never contact him again. Drake wanted to believe her, but the scars of her betrayal ran deep. Every time her phone buzzed, he felt a pang of anxiety. Every time she left the house, he wondered if she was being truthful about where she was going. "I feel like I'm going crazy," he admitted to Dr. Merrill during one session. "I want to trust her, but I can't turn off the part of me that's waiting for her to lie again." "That's normal after a betrayal," Dr. Merrill said gently. "Trust takes time to rebuild. The question is, do you believe Emily is committed to earning it?" Drake glanced at Emily, who was sitting beside him, her eyes filled with guilt and determination. "I think she's trying," he said. "But I don't know if it's enough." One night, as they were sitting on the back porch, Emily turned to Drake, her expression serious. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," she began. "About being an open book." Drake raised an eyebrow. "And? I want to write it all down," she said. "Everything. The whole truth, from start to finish. No more hiding, no more half-truths. I think it's the only way we can move forward." Drake hesitated, unsure if he was ready to hear everything. But after a moment, he nodded. "Okay. Write it down. I want to know." Emily reached for his hand, her grip firm. "Thank you, Drake. For giving me a chance to make this right." As the days passed, Emily worked on her letter, pouring her heart into every word. When she finally handed it to Drake, her hands were trembling. "Whatever you feel after reading this," she said, "just know that I love you. And I'm sorry." Drake nodded, his heart pounding as he unfolded the letter. The truth was finally in his hands, but whether it would bring closure or more pain remained to be seen. Drake sat alone in the living room, the letter Emily had handed him resting on the coffee table. The weight of her words seemed to radiate from the pages, daring him to pick them up. His chest tightened as he reached for the paper, knowing that whatever was written inside could either break him further or begin to mend the shattered trust between them. He unfolded the letter, his hands trembling slightly, and began to read. "Drake. I know there's nothing I can say to take away the pain I've caused you, but I need you to know how deeply sorry I am. You deserve the truth, and I've been too afraid to give it to you because I didn't want to lose you. But I realize now that withholding the truth is just another way of lying, and you deserve better. When I first met Nate, I didn't think anything of him. He was a coworker, someone I crossed paths with occasionally. But as time went on, we started talking more, first about work and then about everything else. He made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. It started with little things, compliments, jokes, texts about projects. But then the conversations became more personal. I told him things about our marriage that I shouldn't have. I told him I felt like we were drifting apart, like we were living as roommates instead of partners. And he listened. He made me feel understood, and I let myself believe that was harmless. But it wasn't harmless, Drake. It was a betrayal, even if I didn't realize it at the time. The night I went out with some coworkers a few months ago, Nate was there. That's when things crossed a line. We didn't kiss, but there was a moment when I thought we might. I pulled away, but I can't pretend it wasn't on my mind. I hated myself for it, and I swore I would stop talking to him. But I didn't. After that night, I started saving our messages, not because I wanted to keep them, but because I needed to remind myself of the line I had already crossed. I told myself it was a way to hold myself accountable, but looking back, I realize it was just another excuse. The last message I sent him was 2 weeks ago. He reached out, asking if I was okay, and I told him we couldn't talk anymore. I told him I loved my husband, and I was going to fight for our marriage. I haven't heard from him since, and I have no intention of speaking to him again. I know I've given you every reason not to believe me, but I need you to know that I never stopped loving you, Drake. I let my insecurities and doubts cloud my judgment, and I hurt you in the process. I'm so sorry. If you decide that you can't forgive me, I'll understand. But if you're willing to try, I'll spend the rest of my life proving to you that I'm worthy of your trust again. With all my heart. Emily. Drake stared at the letter, the words blurring as his vision clouded with unshed tears. He set it down, his hands trembling. Part of him felt relief, at least now, he had the full story. But another part felt like the wound had been reopened, the betrayal laid bare in her own words. That night, Emily found him sitting on the back porch, staring out at the stars. She approached cautiously, her movements tentative. "Did you read it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Drake nodded but didn't look at her. "I read it." Emily sat beside him, wringing her hands. "I meant every word," she said softly. "I know it doesn't change what I did, but I wanted you to know the truth." Drake was silent for a long moment, his thoughts swirling. Finally, he turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" Emily sighed, her shoulders slumping. "Because I was scared. I thought if I told you everything, you'd leave. And I couldn't bear the thought of losing you." "You almost lost me anyway," Drake said, his voice heavy with emotion. "By hiding it, you made it worse." "I know," Emily said, her tears spilling over. "And I'll regret that for the rest of my life." The days that followed were a delicate dance between confrontation and connection. They continued their counseling sessions, where Drake shared his struggles with forgiveness, and Emily opened up about her insecurities and fears. Slowly, they began to rebuild the foundation of their marriage, though the cracks were still visible. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Emily reached for Drake's hand. "I know I've said this 100 times, but thank you for not giving up on us." Drake looked at her, his expression softening. "I'm not doing this for you," he said. "I'm doing this for us. For what we had. For what we might be able to have again." Emily nodded, her grip on his hand tightening. "That's all I could ever ask for." Despite their progress, Drake couldn't shake the lingering doubts. He often found himself replaying her words, questioning whether she truly meant them or if they were just another attempt to salvage their relationship. But every time he felt the anger bubbling up, he reminded himself of the letter, her raw, unfiltered truth, and the look in her eyes when she handed it to him. One night, as they lay in bed, Drake turned to Emily. "Do you think we'll ever get back to the way we were?" Emily hesitated, then shook her head. "I don't think we can go back," she said softly. "But maybe we can build something new. Something stronger." Drake considered her words, a flicker of hope stirring in his chest. Maybe. The fragile peace between Drake and Emily lingered like a thread stretched to its limit. While counseling and her letter had helped them take steps toward healing, the tension in their home was undeniable. Trust, once broken, was proving far harder to rebuild than either of them had imagined. A week after Drake read Emily's letter, they sat in another counseling session with Dr. Merrill. This time, the topic was forgiveness. "Drake," Dr. Merrill began, "you've said you're willing to try to rebuild your marriage. What does forgiveness look like to you?" Drake frowned, leaning forward in his chair. "I don't know," he admitted. "I want to move past this, but every time I think about forgiving her, I get stuck. I can't forget the way she lied to me. The way she confided in someone else instead of me." Emily's face crumpled, but she stayed silent, letting Drake continue. "It's like there's this wall between us now," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I don't know if I'll ever be able to break it down." Dr. Merrill nodded thoughtfully. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting," she said gently. It's about choosing to release the anger and resentment that's holding you back. But it's a process, one that takes time. Drake glanced at Emily, her tear-streaked face a mixture of guilt and hope. I want to try, he said finally. For her. For us. But I need her to meet me halfway. Emily reached for his hand, her grip firm despite the tremble in her fingers. I'll do whatever it takes, she whispered. I promise. That evening, Emily suggested they do something together as a family. Let's take Sam to the park, she said, referring to their golden retriever. It's been a while since we had a day just for us. Drake hesitated, his instinct to retreat warring with the small glimmer of hope her suggestion sparked. All right, he said finally. Let's go. They spent the afternoon walking the trails, watching Sam chase after sticks and rolling in the grass. For the first time in weeks, Drake felt a sense of normalcy creeping back into their lives. Emily's laughter, genuine and unguarded, reminded him of the woman he had fallen in love with. As they sat on a bench, watching the sunset, Emily turned to him. Do you ever think we'll be happy again? Drake stared at the horizon, his mind churning. I don't know, he said honestly. But I think we have a shot if we keep trying. Emily smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. That's enough for me. Despite their progress, Drake's lingering doubts continued to haunt him. He found himself questioning Emily's every move, second-guessing her motivations, and bracing for another betrayal. One night, unable to sleep, he decided to check their shared bank account. It wasn't something he had done often in the past, but the fear of hidden secrets gnawed at him. To his relief, most of the transactions were routine, groceries, gas, and the occasional coffee shop purchase. But one charge caught his attention, a florist. Drake frowned. Emily hadn't mentioned buying flowers, and he couldn't recall seeing any in the house. The charge was dated 2 weeks earlier, the same time Emily claimed she had cut ties with Nate. The next morning, Drake confronted her. Did you buy flowers a couple of weeks ago? He asked, keeping his tone casual. Emily froze mid-step, her face paling slightly. Flowers? No. Why? There's a charge on our account from a florist, Drake said, watching her closely. Care to explain? Emily's eyes darted away, her voice faltering. Oh, that. I bought flowers for a coworker's birthday. I must have forgotten to mention it. Which coworker? Drake pressed. Emily hesitated, her discomfort obvious. It was, for the office. A group thing. Drake's chest tightened. And Nate wasn't part of this group thing, was he? Her silence spoke volumes. Later that evening, Emily approached him as he sat on the back porch, nursing a beer. Drake, I need to tell you something, she said, her voice trembling. What now? Drake asked, his frustration bubbling to the surface. I did buy flowers, she admitted, her hands twisting nervously. But they weren't for a coworker. They were for me. For you? Drake asked, his confusion mounting. Emily nodded, tears filling her eyes. I wanted to remind myself of the person I used to be. The person I want to be again. I know it sounds ridiculous, but buying those flowers felt like a step towards something better. Drake stared at her, unsure whether to believe her. Why didn't you just tell me that? Because I knew it would sound suspicious, Emily said. And I didn't want to risk setting us back. Well, you did, Drake said bluntly. Lying to me, even about something small, just makes me think you're still hiding more. I'm not, Emily said, her tears spilling over. I swear, Drake. I'm done with the lies. I panicked. The incident, though minor compared to her previous betrayals, reignited Drake's doubts. He brought it up during their next counseling session, where Dr. Merrill encouraged them to confront the deeper issue, trust. Emily, Dr. Merrill said, Do you understand why even small deceptions are so damaging? Emily nodded, her face red with shame. Because they make Drake question everything I say. And Drake, Dr. Merrill said, turning to him, do you think it's possible to rebuild trust when these smaller betrayals occur? Drake sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know, he admitted. It feels like every time we make progress, something happens to drag us back down. That's normal, Dr. Merrill said gently. Rebuilding trust is a process, not a straight line. The key is to focus on the overall trajectory, not just the setbacks. After the session, Drake and Emily sat in the car, the silence between them heavy. Finally, Emily reached for his hand. I'm sorry for lying about the flowers, she said softly. I know it seems small, but I should have been honest. I'll do better, Drake. I promise. Drake nodded, though his heart was still heavy. I want to believe you, he said quietly. But it's going to take time. Emily squeezed his hand. I'm not going anywhere. That night, as they lay in bed, Drake found himself staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. He wanted to believe that they could move past this, that Emily's promises were genuine. But the scars of her betrayal felt like a constant reminder of how easily trust could be broken. As Emily slept beside him, her breathing soft and steady, Drake whispered to himself, we'll see. Drake awoke to the soft glow of the morning sun streaming through the bedroom window. Emily was still asleep beside him, her expression peaceful. Watching her, Drake felt a pang of nostalgia for the simpler times in their relationship, when trust was implicit and their love felt unshakable. But now, even in quiet moments, the shadow of her betrayal lingered, a constant reminder of the cracks in their foundation. That day, as they ate breakfast in silence, Emily broke the tension. I was thinking, maybe we should get away for a weekend. Just the two of us. Drake raised an eyebrow. A weekend away? Emily nodded, her tone hopeful. We could use the time to reconnect. No work, no distractions, just us. Drake hesitated. The idea of a trip felt both appealing and daunting. Could they truly focus on each other without the weight of their issues looming over them? Still, part of him wanted to try. Where were you thinking? There's a cabin upstate I found online, Emily said, her eyes lighting up. It's quiet, near a lake. I think it could be good for us. All right, Drake said cautiously. But don't expect this trip to fix everything. I don't, Emily said quickly. I just want us to have a chance to start fresh. The cabin was exactly as Emily had described, secluded, serene, and surrounded by nature. As they unloaded their bags, Drake found himself relaxing slightly. The crisp air and the sounds of the forest provided a welcome escape from the tension of their daily lives. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Emily reached for Drake's hand. Thank you for coming, she said softly. I know it's not easy. Drake nodded, staring into the flames. It's not. But I'm here. That has to count for something. It does, Emily said, her voice trembling. More than you know. The weekend passed in a blur of quiet moments and tentative conversations. They went hiking, shared meals by candlelight, and even laughed at old memories. For the first time in months, Drake felt a glimmer of hope, like maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild what had been lost. But the peace was shattered on their last night at the cabin. As Drake went to the car to grab something he'd forgotten, he noticed Emily's phone sitting in the passenger seat. A notification popped up on the screen, catching his attention. It was from a number he didn't recognize. Unknown, I wish you were here with me instead. Drake's heart sank. His hands shook as he picked up the phone and unlocked it. The message thread confirmed his worst fears. It was Nate. Nate, I miss our talks. This silence is killing me. Emily, we can't keep doing this. I told you it's over. Nate, you said that before. But I know you're just scared. We have something real, Emily. You can't ignore it forever. Drake stood there, the phone clutched in his hand, his mind racing. Emily had told him she'd cut all ties with Nate, but this conversation proved otherwise. Even if she hadn't initiated contact, she hadn't been completely honest. He stormed back into the cabin, the phone in his hand. Emily looked up from her book, her smile fading as she saw his expression. "Who's this from?" Drake demanded, holding up the phone. Emily's face paled. "Drake, I can explain." "Can you?" he said, his voice rising. "Because it looks like you're still talking to Nate. After everything you've promised me, you're still lying." "I'm not lying," Emily cried. "He reached out to me, I didn't respond." "Then what's this?" Drake said, scrolling to her last message. "We can't keep doing this." "That sure sounds like a response to me." Emily's tears spilled over. "I didn't want to make things worse by telling you he contacted me. I thought if I ignored him, he'd stop." "But you didn't ignore him," Drake said coldly. "You engaged. You lied to me again." "I didn't mean to," Emily said, her voice breaking. "I was scared you'd think I hadn't changed." Drake stared at her, his chest tight with anger and heartbreak. "Do you even understand what you've done? Every time I start to believe we might have a chance, you prove me wrong." "I'm sorry," Emily whispered, her sobs racking her body. "I don't know what else I can say." That night, Drake slept on the couch, his mind a storm of emotions. The hope he'd felt earlier in the trip had been replaced by a deep, crushing sense of betrayal. He couldn't keep living like this, constantly questioning, constantly doubting. Something had to change. When they returned home the next day, Drake told Emily he needed space. "I can't keep doing this," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "You say you want to fix things, but your actions keep proving otherwise." "Drake, please," Emily begged, tears streaming down her face. "Don't give up on us. I love you." "If you loved me, you wouldn't keep lying," Drake said flatly. "I need time to figure out what I want." Emily nodded reluctantly, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "Take all the time you need," she whispered. "I'll be here." Over the next few weeks, Drake focused on himself. He threw himself into work, spent time with friends, and rediscovered hobbies he'd long neglected. The distance from Emily gave him clarity, though the question of their future still loomed. One evening, as he sat alone in the living room, his phone buzzed with a message from Emily. "Emily, can we talk? I've been working on myself, and I need you to know how much I still want us to work." Drake stared at the message, his emotions swirling. He wasn't sure if he was ready to face her, but he knew he couldn't avoid the conversation forever. That night, as they sat across from each other at the kitchen table, Emily poured her heart out. She spoke of her regrets, her fears, and the steps she'd been taking to address her issues. She'd started therapy on her own and cut all ties with Nate, this time for good. "I know I've hurt you," she said, her voice trembling. "But I still believe in us, Drake. I know we can rebuild, no matter how long it takes." Drake looked at her, his heart heavy. "You've said that before, Emily. Why should I believe you this time?" "Because I'm different," Emily said, her tears falling freely. "I know words don't mean much right now, but I hope my actions will. I'm asking you to give me one last chance." Drake sighed, his emotions warring within him. "Finally," he said, "I don't know if I can forgive you, Emily. But I'm willing to try." Emily reached for his hand, her eyes filled with hope. "Thank you," she whispered. "I won't let you down." The weeks following Drake's decision to try again with Emily were fraught with uncertainty. He had agreed to give her one last chance, but trust, once broken, isn't easily restored. Their marriage felt like a fragile structure, each day a test of whether it would stand or crumble under the weight of its history. Emily's efforts to prove her sincerity were unwavering. She began attending individual therapy sessions twice a week, regularly shared updates with Drake about her progress, and deleted every app or contact that could connect her to Nate. Every gesture was deliberate, and yet, Drake couldn't shake the lingering doubt that gnawed at him. One night, after an exhausting day at work, Drake came home to find Emily waiting for him in the living room. She held a small box in her hands, her expression a mixture of apprehension and determination. "What's that?" Drake asked, setting his bag down. Emily took a deep breath. "It's something I've been working on in therapy," she said. "A way to show you that I'm serious about rebuilding our marriage." She handed him the box, and Drake hesitated before opening it. Inside was a collection of handwritten letters, each sealed in its own envelope. The first one was labeled, "Day 1, Why I Chose You." "These are letters I've been writing to you," Emily explained. "Every day, I write down a memory, a reason I love you, or something I want to work on. I want you to read them. One a day. To see how much you mean to me." Drake stared at the letters, his throat tightening. The gesture was thoughtful, even touching, but it also reminded him of how far they still had to go. "You've put a lot of work into this," he said quietly. "Because I love you," Emily said. "And I want you to feel that again." Drake nodded, though he couldn't bring himself to say anything more. The following morning, Drake opened the first letter. "Day 1, Why I Chose You." "Drake, I still remember the first time we met. You were so kind, so easy to talk to. I felt like I could be myself around you in a way I never had with anyone else. That's why I chose you then, and it's why I choose you now, because with you, I've always felt like I'm home." Drake folded the letter, a bittersweet smile tugging at his lips. Her words stirred something in him, a flicker of the connection they'd once shared. The days turned into weeks, and Drake found himself reading Emily's letters each morning. Some were filled with apologies and promises to do better, others recounted moments from their early years together, the memories woven with love and regret. Slowly, the letters began to chip away at the wall Drake had built around his heart. But despite their progress, a final test of their relationship loomed. One evening, Drake received a call from an unknown number. Against his better judgment, he answered. "Drake, it's Nate." Drake's blood ran cold. "What do you want?" "I need to talk to you," Nate said, his tone calm but firm. "It's about Emily." Drake gritted his teeth. "We're done talking about Emily. Whatever you think you're doing, it ends now." "I'm not trying to cause trouble," Nate said quickly. "But I think you should know something. She reached out to me a few days ago." Drake's chest tightened. "That's a lie. Check her messages if you don't believe me," Nate said. "But I'm telling you the truth. She said she needed closure." Drake hung up without another word, his hands shaking. Nate's words replayed in his mind, their implications suffocating. Could Emily have lied to him again? Could she have undone all their progress with one reckless decision? That night, as Emily came home from therapy, Drake was waiting for her in the kitchen. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Did you talk to Nate?" he asked, his voice cold. Emily froze, her expression stunned. "What? No. Why would you ask me that?" "Because he called me," Drake said, his anger barely contained. "He said you reached out to him for closure. Is it true?" Emily's face twisted with disbelief. "No, Drake. I haven't spoken to him. I blocked his number weeks ago. You can check my phone if you want." Drake studied her, his heart pounding. "I want the truth, Emily. If you're lying to me again." "I'm not lying," Emily said, her voice breaking. "Drake, I swear, I haven't spoken to him. I don't know why he'd say that." Drake stared at her, his emotions warring. Part of him wanted to believe her, but the fear of being betrayed again was overwhelming. Finally, he said, "Give me your phone." Without hesitation, Emily handed it over. Drake opened her messages, scrolling through her recent conversations. Nate's number wasn't there, nor were there any deleted threads in her backups. "I told you," Emily said softly. "I'm done with him. He's just trying to stir things up." Drake let out a shaky breath, his anger giving way to exhaustion. "Why would he do that?" "Because he can't let go," Emily said. "But I have, Drake. I promise you, I have." That night, as they lay in bed, Drake's mind raced. He wanted to believe Emily, to trust that Nate's call was a desperate attempt to sow doubt. But trust was still a fragile thing between them, and he wasn't sure how many more tests it could survive. "Do you think we'll ever be okay again?" Emily asked, her voice breaking the silence. Drake turned to her, his expression weary but sincere. "I think we're closer than we were," he said. "But it's going to take time." Emily nodded, her tears glistening in the moonlight. "I'm willing to wait. For as long as it takes." Drake reached for her hand, holding it tightly. "Then we'll keep trying." In the weeks that followed, the tension began to ease. Nate's call proved to be an isolated incident, and Emily's actions consistently reflected her commitment to rebuilding their marriage. Drake still read her letters every morning, finding comfort in her words and the effort she put into proving her love. One evening, as they sat on the back porch watching the sunset, Emily turned to Drake. "Thank you for giving me another chance," she said softly. Drake squeezed her hand, his heart heavy but hopeful. "Thank you for proving it was worth it." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Drake felt something he hadn't in a long time: peace. Their road had been long and painful, but for the first time, he believed they were moving toward a future worth fighting for.